Welcome to you all. Thank you for coming out tonight. We were a little worried a couple of days ago how things were going to be going tonight, but it looks, thankfully, everything cleared up. We're here, of course, to celebrate the gift, a very generous donation of Ed Kashi's entire photo archive. And basically, so this is in some ways a celebration of Ed's being with us here tonight, and so we're delighted. And he'll be talking to you in a few minutes. But I also want to extend a very warm welcome to the members of the Austin Photo Night group. And thanks to you, Ed, for enduring the air travel from Aspen, Colorado. He flew in from Aspen, Colorado yesterday, and you were only like, what, 3 hours late or something? Yeah.
Actually, doesn't sound like a very different tough thing.
Yeah, well, actually, I learned something. I had no idea we had nonstop flights from Aspen to Austin, but there you go. I don't get out as much as I used to, so anyway. All right, so anyway, I don't want to take too much time away from Ed. He's the program, and he'll be speaking in a moment. But I do want to say some things about Ed that he's not likely to say about himself. That's my job here. Ed's a native of New York City. He is a graduate of Syracuse University's Newhouse School of Public Communications. His photographs have appeared in numerous publications, including National Geographic Magazine, the New York Times Magazine, Time, the New Yorker, and Newsweek, and others. Ed has also produced 17 major feature articles, and during Ed's 45-year career, I can't believe that, 45, okay. During his 45-year career as a photographer, his professional travels have literally spanned the globe. I'd love to see what his passports look like. His work is taking him to more than 100 countries. His work has also received numerous awards, including the World Press Photo Award and American Photography. And his photographs have also been exhibited literally worldwide. His editorial assignments and personal projects have generated 14 books. Does that count our new one? Okay, good. Ed has visually documented a stunning array of subjects, including an insightful project about aging in America that he conducted with his wife and collaborator, the multi-talented Julie Winokur. In 2002, Ed and Julie founded Talking Eyes Media, a nonprofit company that has produced numerous award-winning short films, exhibits, books, and multimedia pieces that explore significant social issues. I'm sorry that Julie couldn't be with us tonight, still in Aspen. Is she a skier? Okay. Oh, she's riding. Good for her. Okay. But I'm pleased to announce that Julie, who's very gifted herself and productive, has also placed her archive at the Briscoe Center. Julie is a writer, a book author, filmmaker, whose archive is an outstanding addition to the center's collection. So we're delighted to have Ed and Julie both part of our family, archival family. Now, one of the primary missions of the Briscoe Center is to collect the work of outstanding photojournalists and documentary photographers like Ed Kashi, because their images can be rich sources of visual historical evidence that can be read and interpreted in the same way as textual documents. If critically analyzed and evaluated, that characteristic can allow them to serve as important sources for research and teaching. We're a history center, and this is why we do what we do. Our collecting philosophy is governed by our mission to preserve not only photographic images and records, but also original documents, publications, and artifacts that constitute the evidence essential to an understanding of the American past, and to make those materials available to anyone in need of them. Never have we needed our past preserved more than today. When Ed and I first began our discussions about preserving his archive, I was well aware of his outstanding reputation, and I knew that it was important that his body of work be preserved as valuable resources for research and teaching. Thankfully, Ed was impressed with the Briscoe Center's ambitious effort to collect the complete archives of leading photojournalists and documentary photographers. He readily understood and appreciated our mission, which led to his decision to donate his life's work to the center. And that's something we take very seriously when someone makes that kind of commitment. It's your life. This is an extensive collection. The analog portion, which covers every phase of his career, is approximately 300 cubic feet in size and includes negatives, contact sheets, color transparencies, prints, and publications. The separate digital archive is 80 terabytes in size. We had to find a huge storage facility for those terabytes. The Briscoe Center publishes books based on our collections. We've probably done, I think I've lost count now, but we've probably published something like 40 books in the last few years. And I'm pleased that our most recent book, and if we could throw that on the screen, no, we can't do that. We will when you come up, that's your first slide. Okay. I'm pleased that our most recent book is Ed Kashi's A Period in Time, Looking Back While Moving Forward, which is a retrospective overview of Ed's remarkable career. Now, I've got here in my notes, hold up book, but it turns out that I have a bad back and it's so heavy. Just kidding, Ed. All right. But the pages of this is a wonderful book. It's a wonderful book. And the pages are filled with Ed's powerful and compelling images that demonstrate his perceptive vision, which he has a huge amount of. A period in time makes it possible to not only gain an understanding of Ed's skill and talent as a photographer, but to also understand the depth and breadth of his archive that we have now. Now, after our program, I hope you'll all join us for a reception in the Briscoe Center upstairs, where you can purchase a copy of A Period in Time and have Ed sign it to you. I'm sure Ed would be delighted to do that. Now, before I ask Ed to step forward, I want to announce that the center is sponsoring 3 additional programs this spring featuring our photography archives. 2 will be about other new acquisitions, and the 3rd will be about another new photography book published by the center. The first program will be on Wednesday night, March the 18th, when New York documentary photographer and author Amy Arbus will discuss her archive and show you pictures. And she's recently, we haven't announced it yet, but Amy has recently donated her entire archive to us as well. Amy is a gifted photographer in her own right, and she's the daughter of the famed photographer Diane Arbus. On Wednesday night, March the 25th, we'll take a look at another addition to our photograph collection, the archive of the late photojournalist Ben Martin, whose former wife, film and television actress, you may have seen her on Dark Shadows if anyone's as old as I am. Anyway, actress Catherine Lee Scott has donated his archive, she inherited from her former husband, and she will discuss Ben Martin's work and show his pictures, and that's the night of March the 25th here. In late April, and we've got the exact date is yet to be determined unless we've got news recently, okay. but it'll be late April. We're going to host Sausalito, California, photojournalist and medical doctor Matthew Nathans, whose archive has been a valuable asset to our photography program for a few years now. We will soon publish Matthew's new photography book, Light in Dark Places, which provides a retrospective look at his amazing career, not only as a photographer, who was the first photographer on the scene of the Jonestown mass murder, but also as an emergency room physician. So please join us for these coming events. Thank you for coming tonight, and please welcome Ed Kashi.
All right. Hello, everyone. Don, thank you for that wonderful introduction.
You're welcome.
All right. So, let's see. I'm going to try to put 45 years in 45 minutes. So, and again, thank you, Don, Aaron, and your team. And I just can't tell you how much it's meant to me in the last 2 years since I've donated the archive and worked with you. And, thank you for producing this amazing book. So, so for me, what I want to do this evening is share excerpts from different projects that this book represents. I guess I'll just jump right into it. When I was a photo student at Syracuse, and I never picked up a camera before I went to college. I wanted to be a writer, and then when I got to college, as I've said, a freshman poetry teacher absolved me of any notion that I might be a writer. And in a panic, I thought he was quite cruel. I thought my work was amazing. And I was like looking through the, course catalog frantically. And unbeknownst to me, I ended up being at one of the best universities for photojournalism in the world, especially at that point. Anyway, so I decided, the reasons that I imagined being a writer, where I could be a storyteller, I could engage with the world. I grew up in a very, very political in the 1960s and 70s in New York. As I was saying over lunch, like when I was 10 years old, I stuffed envelopes for Hubert Humphrey's campaign. Of course, I didn't know what I was doing, but it was the time, like my friends and I back then, the cool thing was who had the coolest Eugene McCarthy button. Anyway, so I'm really dating myself, but that's what I grew up with that sense of urgency of a sort of being socially engaged, politically engaged. And so I was a New York kid. I didn't grow up in a wealthy family. I'd never gone farther than maybe, Syracuse in West in America. But two things that happened while I was at Syracuse when I was a student was I went to the Mardi Gras in New Orleans, and then I studied abroad in London. And those two sort of experiences and travels opened my eyes up, and I decided I was not going to go back to New York when I graduated. I moved to San Francisco. And for 25 years, that's really where I began my adult life and my career. So these images are from when I was a student in London. Early in my career, I went to Colombia, one of the first places in the developing world that I traveled to. Just starting to just experiment with photography. When I moved to San Francisco, I ended up becoming like a Silicon Valley photographer. I photographed Steve Jobs 8 or 9 times, Larry Ellison, Bill Gates. And after a few years of doing that, I realized that is not why I wanted to be a photographer. I wanted to work for Life magazine and do these great black and white photo essays. And so I pivoted. And it was probably one of the most important things I did. And I went to Northern Ireland, and in 1988 began what became a 3-year project looking at the Protestant community in Northern Ireland. And it also set the stage for kind of how I was going, even to today, how I work, which is, long-term, in-depth, I would call it like documentary photojournalism, where I'm trying to create images that might have meaning in the moment, but that will be timeless. This is after an IRA bombing. It's a British soldier. This is in West Belfast. And this is really where I also cut my teeth. It was the first project I worked on where when I looked at the pictures, I thought, okay, finally, I'm doing something that I always sort of, aspired to create. And also, it taught me, in a sense, I'm as much an anthropologist as I am a photojournalist, in that I went really in depth. I decided to focus on the Protestant community, and because I felt it was an underreported part of a story that many people felt they knew. And so I spent months hanging out with I decided to focus on a bunch of 18-year-old boys in Tigers Bay, North Belfast, because I figured at that stage, it was the 20th anniversary of the Troubles, these would be kids who all they knew was conflict. And, by going that intimate and that in depth with a group of people, it really, opened the doors to many scenes and situations I might not otherwise had made. And, also I don't know if you guys know this, but something like a quarter of all U.S. presidents hail from Ulster Protestant stock. From Grant to Nixon. I'm not even counting, Kennedy and Biden, the Irish Catholic presidents. And so that also imbued me with this sense of, that this place had a connection to where I came from as well. And then, after the wall fell down in 1989 in Berlin, I went with a journalist to what was East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Poland for a few weeks in this reporting trip. And we just felt, now that often what happens when there's a sort of a turnover of governments or regimes is there's a vacuum of authority. And so you can actually, as a journalist, go in and do things that you normally cannot do. So one of the stories we came upon was in East Berlin, or in Berlin, and I decided to go back a few times and develop a project looking at this culture and nightlife in unified Berlin. And so this is like a cabaret in a mall in West Berlin, and it's a gay club in East Berlin. And this is very different than work I had done previously, but it's a chance to sort of look at, I've used photography and my work to explore things that I'm genuinely interested in. And for all of the photographers, I know there are a lot here. By the way, some old friends and colleagues here, so thank you so much for coming. To me, the camera is like a passport into worlds that I would want to learn more about. And so while I've done a lot of hard edge reporting and journalistic work working in conflict zones and so forth, there's also something just about the celebration of using the camera to sort of pique my curiosity and learn more about the world. So one other element in this book, which is actually from a previous book called Photojournalisms, and that book was printed in 2008, and it was an amalgam of almost 20 years of journal writings to Julie, who was my girlfriend and then now my wife of 33 years. And, it's a very lonely profession, especially doing this kind of work. I've spent almost more than half of the last 40 years away and alone. And thankfully, Julie and my kids have stuck with me, and we're doing great right now, but it was really tough. And so anyway, I wanted to include some excerpts from these journals in the book. So the work in Northern Ireland, in some circuitous way, brought me to National Geographic. While I was one day when I was at a cafe in Derry, in Londonderry, in Northern Ireland, I met a British painter who was married to a Turkish Kurdish woman. And when she told me that the Kurds, who as a dumb American, I did not know who the Kurds were at that point, were the largest ethnic group in the world without a nation of their own, I was hooked. And so I started to do massive research on the Kurdish people, and I decided to pitch it to National Geographic. And thankfully they said yes. It was like a 26-week contract. I went to 8 countries. This is in southeastern Turkey. It's a terrorist courtroom. This is in northern Iraq. This is after Saddam's genocidal campaign against the Kurds, which was over roughly a 15-year period where he killed about 150,000 Kurds, destroyed literally 4,000 towns and villages. And one of the great things that we did, and George H. Bush did this Operation Provide Comfort, where with our European allies, we went into northern Iraq, we secured that area, and it allowed the Kurds to go back, but this is what they came back to. The other thing that the Kurds brought me to is my own heritage. My mother and father were born and raised in Baghdad, and they moved to New York in 1940, where I was born. And I grew up as an American kid. I didn't think of my heritage in that way. And when I look back on some of the things that happened as a kid, I know my junior high baseball coach probably would have been fired for calling me a camel jockey, but I didn't understand that joke because I didn't see myself in that way. And it was really the Kurdish people and this story that brought me to the places that my parents came from. So yeah, I went to Iraq, Iran, Syria, Turkey, Lebanon. It was a massive undertaking. And man, I learned so much, but this is work that I've continued to do. I was just in northern Iraq last September. For me, the Kurdish people really represent, they're some of the greatest victims of geopolitics, in the last 100 years. Like a fifth of all people in Turkey are Kurdish. And I'm planning to go back there later this year to continue work and also to teach a workshop. So this is another journal entry. This is from the Crimea. This is a Muslim burial ritual. What I wrote, or the journal entries, the way I've sort of put them together with the images, in some cases they were just political observations or just reporting, and in some cases they were incredibly emotional. My dad died when I was 10, and back in 1967 they didn't let me see him for the last week of his life because that's just, I guess, what you did with kids. And so I never got to say goodbye to him. So there are times when I've photographed many sort of death scenes in funeral situations. I'm often like the one crying the most because, I'm so deeply touched by these situations. Anyway, so one of the next projects we worked on, City of the Dead in Cairo. And this is a place that I discovered while on assignment for National Geographic on a different story. So this is a very important and famous cemetery in the Islamic world that's in the northeast corner of Cairo. But what's interesting about it is hundreds of thousands of people live in it. So while it's still an active cemetery, and again, there are very important Sufi saints and clerics and wealthy and important Egyptian families that are buried there. But also, to me, and this was the first story that I worked on with Julie, who was then a budding writer in San Francisco when we first met, it was also a story kind of about overpopulation and how rural people come into these big cities in the developing world, and there's no place for them. And so these are all tombs that have been, the bodies have been taken out, and there's small factories now in these places. There's a glass blowing factory. It's just fascinating. And again, another chance to sort of where my camera brought me into a world that I would otherwise never see. There are weddings. I mean, it's just amazing. This sort of full sort of circle of life that would happen in a place where people are buried. This is Manufi, the pigeon man. And the dogs were actually really scary, because especially when they gang together and they start following you. Okay. And then during that time, I also, this would happen quite often well, it still happens in my career, where I'll piggyback things I'm interested in pursuing off of commission. So I was invited to do a Day in the Life of Thailand, one of those big Day in the Life book projects. This is 1994. And so I always wanted to go to Vietnam. Again, I grew up with the Vietnam War in my blood. I went to anti-war demonstrations at the age of 12 in Manhattan. Again, even though I didn't know really what I was doing, it just felt like I needed to be there. And so I had always wanted to go to Vietnam once I grew up. So I go to Vietnam. I want to do a story on, this is a rare thing that happened, where the story I went to do, I realized I was not able to do, which was the burgeoning youth culture in Vietnam. This is in Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon. But what I was amazed by was this sort of motorcycle culture, that everything happened on two wheels. And so I spent the next 2 weeks on the back of motorbikes just making all these random pictures. This is a girl doing her homework on on her dad's back on the way to school in the morning, bringing, your geese to market, kids. This is more about what I wanted to originally do, was like sort of youth culture. And so this is another, for me, example of that, let's say, not a super serious issue, but a chance to explore something that I was curious about and go to a place that I always wanted to go. So around this time, our family started, this is in London with Eli and Isabel. Isabel, I think, was only like 6 months old or something, on our way to South Africa. So over the years, I've done a lot of work in the Middle East. I've spent the equivalent of years in the Middle East working, and this next set of images are just random images. Actually, this is from Syria. This is from Aleppo, the great citadel of Aleppo that is, I think, mostly been destroyed at this point from the civil war. This is also from Syria. It was interesting working in this region because people would come up to me and assume I spoke Arabic, and then I don't, for whatever reason. My dad spoke 7 languages, and all they taught me was English. But that was then. But I would have these, what I thought were very comical, but also intense moments when I would be with Iraqi or Syrian mukhabarat, like the security guys, and they just all assumed I was part of the Zionist American conspiracy, and they were convinced that I understood Arabic. And I could tell, like, even when they were talking with each other in the car, they were like talking in a very cautious way, as though I could understand what they were saying. Anyway, this is in Beirut. This is also, so one of the stories I pitched to Nat Geo, most of the stories I did for National Geographic are ideas that I pitched to them. It was like writing your own grant proposals, basically. I wanted to look at Beirut after the Civil War. This is 1996. The St. George's Yacht Club with the bombed out building in the background. It's along the Corniche. And this is in Baghdad, 2003, so after we've invaded. And this is U.S. Army soldiers inhabiting, I think, Uday Hussein's, one of his palaces. Very surreal scene. And so this was a time working in, so I decided to go back to Iraq. I'd been there a couple of times on assignment. I sent myself there, I think, 4 times between 2003 and 2004, where I thought I could work freely because Saddam was gone. And yeah, there was about like a 1-year period where I felt I could work there. And then it just became too dangerous for me. And also, I was not on assignment. So anyway, but in that period, this was a scene, this is like a classic, like, dumbass journalist thing where I was actually, I don't know if you guys know who Stephanie Sinclair is, an amazing photographer. We would caravan, and that's actually her car and fixer. And so we see this huge plume of black smoke across Baghdad. We start driving towards it. As we approach it, a U.S. convoy had been hit by an RPG. That's the oil tanker, on fire. And then unbeknownst to us, on our side of the highway are the insurgents. And there's this firefight that we had caught in. So we jump out of our cars, dive into these ditches. And this is the moment where everything had stopped and we're going back to get in our cars. And when I got back to the hotel, my fixer said to me, "Mr. Edmund, I quit." This is in Jordan. It's also in Syria. Syria is such a beautiful country. It's just horrible what's happened there. So one of the other stories or projects that I wanted to do when I was working in Iraq was looking going to the communities. So my family is Jewish on both sides, and they had to leave in 1940 because after literally 3,000 years of living in peace with the Muslims and the Christians and all that, they were forced out. And so this is in the neighborhood that my mom grew up in, and it became tough to work there. I mean, like I say, there was a period of months where it was okay, and then it just became too dangerous. This is in the Gaza Strip. This is just a random images from all the work I've done in the Middle East over the years. One of the other stories I worked on in Iraq was looking at the new Iraqi police. Now, I don't know about you guys I'm sure some of you here have done ride-alongs with police in America. Nothing ever happens, all right? It's like, it's always pretty boring. Well, every time I went out with these guys, someone died. The level of violence was so extreme. This is on patrol at night with them. There's another journal entry. We don't have time, or I can't even read what's there, but anyway, buy the book, no. So one of the other stories during that time that I decided to work on were about Messianic Jewish settlers in the West Bank. So I grew up like non-religious. From the age of 5, I rejected organized religion, and my work has only sort of increased that feeling, frankly. And I'm sorry if that offends anyone here, but anyway. So one of the stories I wanted to work on was looking at the settlers in the West Bank. Like, I thought, why would you want to move to a neighborhood where nobody wants you there? And so this is an ancient, like, spring bath that had been in the Palestinian village and now is controlled by the settlers. And it was an interesting project to work on because in some ways it was similar to the Protestants in Northern Ireland, where essentially they were like the bad guys in the media narrative. And, you know, I didn't feel that way so much about the Protestants, but in this case, I agreed with a lot of the reasons, sort of politically, morally, you know, how the settlers are behaving. But I realized in this project that I don't know how to make people look bad. So even though it was a very important lesson as a relatively young photographer, you know, that while I might disagree with sometimes the people I photographed, I still am trying to capture some element of humanity, or at least to create an understanding of why they believe what they believe, why they act the way they act. There's Ethiopian Jews in Jerusalem. So I don't know if you know this, but in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where supposedly Jesus is buried in Jerusalem, there's this little structure above it that is devoted to Ethiopian Jews. This is a horrific thing in Pakistan. I did this big story for the Geographic on Pakistan, and one of the issues that I wanted to deal with was you know, the issue of the burnt brides, or, you know, women who were either set on fire, or in this case, this woman had acid thrown on her face. So I've always tried to use the camera as a tool or a weapon towards injustice, or in some way trying to illuminate issues that I think are important. Okay, huge pivot. This is one of the largest projects that I worked on with Julie, almost 8 years, looking at aging in America. Don had referred to this project. And this was born out of, after working for years abroad, I realized that I needed to turn my camera on my own culture, on my own society. And when I looked at, you know, what would be one of the great themes of my lifetime, I kept on coming back to the issue of aging. And so this is Frankie Manning, who was one of the originators of the Lindy Hop in Harlem in the 1920s. He went on like reviews with, you know, Billie Holiday and Duke Ellington. And then he was a postal worker for like 40 some odd years. And then I think in his like 70s, or here he's 86. So in his 70s, I can't remember if it was a young couple from Sweden discovered him. And for the last like 15 years of his life, he taught sold-out workshops all over the world of the Lindy Hop. And so one of the traditions he had was on his birthday, he would dance with the same number of women. So this was in Baltimore, and he danced with 86 women. And that was the cover of the book, actually. This is a model in Manhattan, Gloria Barnes. She worked for the Ford Elite Division. We went to 25 states over the almost 8-year period. This was in the before times where you could actually get huge grants from like the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to do media work. I think it's much harder for that now. The burlesque dancer in Southern California, ladies at a bagel shop in Florida. This is the Senior Olympics. It was in Baton Rouge. And one of the first stories I did, I approached this in a very episodic way, breaking it down into little photo essays or issues related to, what does a society look like as it grows old. And this was in Alabama, looking at aging prisoners. And this was the first story we did, and this one was published in the New York Times Sunday Magazine. Went to Pine Ridge, South Dakota, the Native American reservation. We went there to illustrate the element of grandparent. At this point, I think this is 2000, something like 4.5 million children in America were being raised by grandparents. This is in Harlem. And this is probably one of the most beautiful stories we encountered. This is in West Virginia. We wanted to look at rural hospice care. And we found this wonderful organization there that was dispensing this very important service. And they were gracious enough to introduce us to, I think, about 10 different families. Not surprisingly, about 7 of them said no, which I understand, like why should I let a photographer and writer in to my home while a parent is dying or a grandparent is dying? But there were a few people that said yes. And so this is Arden on the left and Warren on the right. Arden was 90, Warren was 76. They met at a Walmart. When Arden started to show out without his wife, Warren got worried. This was such a beautiful story. So he moved in with them, and he took care of Maxine, and this is the moment where she's dying in Arden. And I made a few trips. I ended up living in their farmhouse for like a week with them, and in the middle of that week is when Maxine passed away. And this is my father-in-law. So after working on that project, I like to say that this is a case where being a journalist made me a better human being. Julie didn't need that training. She already was an amazing human being. But when her dad, who was in New Jersey, was starting to show signs of dementia and Parkinson's, he was 82, we moved to New Jersey. We moved him into our home, and he lived the last years of his life with us and died in our home with us around him. So these are some scenes. And then what was amazing is that literally the week we moved him in, I got a call from Brian Storm at MSNBC. Would you like to do a story on the sandwich generation? And that's exactly what we were. We had kids who were 7 and 10, and then an elder who was, who needed support. And I looked at Julie because I said, there's no way we have the capacity to find a family and get permission and get access. And I said, what about us? And she looked at me and she said, you can do it, but I'm going to take care of my father. And so we spent the next 2 years, we got 2 different commissions to do films on Herbie. And it was an amazing experience for us. I hope it was for our kids as well. So, all right, another pivot. All right, hopefully we're doing all right on time here. So around that time, I, again, for the photographer, not just photographers in the room, but for anyone, especially people who are independent, or freelancers, where we're always looking for opportunities or ways to continue to do this work. Well, thank goodness my son played baseball, because I ended up sitting next to another baseball dad in San Francisco at a Little League game who was Professor Michael Watts at Berkeley, who was a world-renowned geography teacher, and he was an expert on the Niger Delta. And so we get talking, and what do you do? What do you do? And the next thing you know, a few months later, he has brought me to the Niger Delta in Nigeria to look at the situation there. And so Nigeria is one of the 10th largest producers and exporters of oil and gas in the world. It should be a very rich place, and for most of the wealth never makes it to the people from whose land this resource comes from. So I spent the next 3 years going back there first on my own, well, first with Professor Watts, then on my own, and then I was able to pitch a story to Nat Geo, and thankfully they said yes, and it ended up becoming a book, Curse of the Black Gold. And it was a very deep look into the impact of what was then 50 years of oil and gas exploitation in the Niger Delta. Excuse me. So, for example, this was abandoned Shell oil rig that had caught fire, and it took 3 weeks for Shell to be allowed in to stop this, because the local youth in this village, who are all armed and angry, would not let them in unless they got whatever money they wanted to get. This is the dysfunction in this place. So, while I went in there with, knives out for the oil companies, I got a very important lesson that really it's the Nigerian government that in this case, in this situation, that I hold accountable, because they're not taking care of the patrimony, this resource they've got, their people, the infrastructure, and regulating the international oil companies. So again, with a project like this, it was about the Niger Delta, not just about oil. So I also looked at culture, religion, all the different aspects of this, what is, I think, the third largest wetlands in the world. So much of it has been ruined by oil and gas exploration. So this is an ExxonMobil facility that's right across from a village. So the fisheries have been decimated from the environmental degradation. It's just, I don't know, maybe it's $2 a day, but then it was literally like most of the people in the Delta were living on $1 a day, while more than $1 trillion of wealth had been generated by oil and gas. I want to show the juxtaposition of people living right amongst, I don't know, would you say maybe Cancer Alley in Louisiana is the closest thing we have? But, I don't know if, well, anyway, I won't get into that. This is the largest abattoir or slaughterhouse. It is an outdoor one in the Delta, and it was just a killing field. It was just bizarre situation. And then this image, when it was published in the Geographic, ended up inspiring a woman in upstate New York to find this boy, Paulinus, who was 14 at the time. And through her church, she found him and ended up paying for him to go to school because she did not want him to work in this sort of hellhole situation. And this is the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta. This was, because there was a breakdown between the government, the oil companies, and the people of the Niger Delta. These guys took up arms, and at one point they had cut off something like 250,000 barrels of oil a day from flowing out of the Delta by either sabotaging or stealing the oil or taking oil workers, like expat workers, hostage. This is the morning after the Nigerian military had gone into a very poor part of Port Harcourt, the main city in the Delta, and just basically wiped out a community of 5,000 people. And this woman was a hotelier, and she was going through the ruins of her hotel, showing me pictures of happier times. India. So it's another example of how, again, I've used this craft, this profession, to sort of seek out to learn more about places that I wanted to go. So I'd seen this story actually in the New York Times about the Golden Quadrilateral Highway Project. It was the largest infrastructure project in India at that point, and it was basically like a 5,000-mile highway system that was going to span the whole country. So I pitched it to the Geographic. They said yes, and I spent, I think, about 14 weeks over a few trips looking at the pitch was I was using this infrastructure project as a metaphor for how India was modernizing, or not. So for instance, because of the highway, these women from this remote village were able to go into the city of Ahmedabad and work. And then you've got these super fancy, malls now that have sprouted up throughout India. Excuse me. So this was interesting. This was This is the body of every trucker. So there's something like 5 million truckers in India. And every trucker will have an assistant, often a young boy. And this is the body of a boy who had died literally on the first day of the job because his driver was drunk and ran into another truck. And so the local police sewed his body up in this burlap bag and left it on the side of the road for his family to come and retrieve it. One of the issues I wanted to deal with was the issue of AIDS and HIV, which was at that point spreading pretty dramatically throughout India. And one of the main conduits that was spreading it were truckers. And so I found out that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they'd done tremendous work, very positive work on this issue there by educating doctors and medical professionals, but also like they'd have these theater troops show up at these big transit points where truckers would stay to teach them about safe sex. So this is actually most of the sex workers here are trans folks, but yeah, this was, so I wanted to sort of hang out at one of these bathhouses, as they're called, to illustrate, this issue. That was pretty poorly said, but anyway. This is a protest against the land grab along the highway. All right, we are pivoting all over the place here. So we're back in Jerusalem. So another story that I wanted to work on was about Arab Christians in the Middle East. I think especially most Americans do not realize that, I think a lot of people don't realize that a lot of Arabs are Christians. They're probably the original Christians. And so I went to Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria to work on this story. So this is in the West Bank, one of the last remaining sort of Palestinian Christian villages. And what's happening now is as the elder generation dies off, all the people that are left are like the older folks. This is an Iraqi refugee in Damascus. This is in the old city, the Christian part of the old city of Damascus. This is also in northern Syria. This amazing monastery in the hills in Syria, in the desert. And these are like Byzantine ruins in the West Bank. So in 2013, I'd worked a lot in Syria. I had actually spent 2 hours with Bashar al-Assad in 2009 on a Nat Geo assignment. I could never have imagined that guy would end up being the nightmare that he was once the civil war began. So in 2013, I just wanted to do something related to the Syrian refugee crisis. And so I pitched a story, and this is a case where I sort of turned the paradigm of the way this profession normally works. I pitched the idea to do something on the mental health crisis among young Syrian refugees to the International Medical Corps, IMC. They're basically America's Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. And I knew that they were working in the Middle East, in Turkey, and in Syria, and Iraq, and Lebanon on this issue. So I pitched the idea to them. They financed my field work in Jordan and Iraq, and then Time Magazine published it. And so these are some images. And also at this point, I had transitioned into doing video. And virtually every project I do now, there'll be some sort of a video component. And in some cases, video has become the main form of storytelling that I taken on, and photography sometimes takes a back seat. This is in northern Iraq, in a refugee camp. This is an excerpt from a story I did about Agent Orange, the enduring impact of Agent Orange in Vietnam. I think I'm probably going to have to move a little faster here. Sorry, thank you guys. All right, and this is work from my last big project, which actually last year the Library of Congress acquired this body of work, which was 10 years looking at the issue of chronic kidney disease, a very specific kind of kidney disease that has been sickening and killing tens of thousands of mostly rural agricultural workers around the world. And at this point, I've worked in 7 different countries on this. I started in Nicaragua, where this image is from, in the sugarcane fields. It's an aspect of kidney disease that affects, without getting too wonky here, a very specific part of the kidney that is different from obesity, high blood pressure, and diabetes, the main causes of chronic kidney disease. And in this one community, Chichigalpa in Nicaragua, something like 70% of the men have died or gotten sick from this disease. I've worked in Nepal, Qatar, El Salvador, Peru, India, and Sri Lanka on this project. And to me, this is an example of what a lot of my work is mainly about at this point, which is more advocacy journalism. You know, where it's for me, it's not good enough anymore to just go and shine a light on a problem. I want to also have my work, if possibly, part of change. And this project has really been an example of that, where not because of what I've done, but the work I've created has been able to be utilized by healthcare professionals, activists, and so forth around this issue to actually change labor practices in sugar mills in El Salvador and Nicaragua, improve the field work of epidemiologists trying to figure out what's the cause of this disease and what are some solutions. This is a former sugarcane worker in Chichigalpa who now makes coffins. And I'm going to end on just with a few images from, this is a previous book called Abandoned Moments. It was actually my last book prior to this one, where, when I was a photo student in London, this picture, I think I was 20 years old, and I made this picture not knowing what I was doing. I was using a flash, and I didn't look through the viewfinder, and I was completely confused. And then I saw the image in the dark, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. And so I coined this term, the abandoned moment, to, and there's a few images here, where basically it's an aspect of my photography that I've continued to use, particularly in conflict zones or tricky situations in terms of my security, where I'm not looking through the viewfinder. I mean, it's shooting from the hip. I mean, I'm not the first person to do this, but it's certainly, I think Gary Winogrand would be a great example of someone who worked that way, where I'm shooting from the hip. It's really intuitive. It's almost like a dance with my subjects or with the world around me. And but then these amazing things happen, as opposed to the Cartier-Bresson decisive moment, which is mostly how I think we probably all try to work, is to be very precise and compose in this very organized and structured way. And this is the opposite of that, where I'm just out of control. I'm reacting to the moment. I'm reacting to light, to characters, to movement around me. It's also a way to work a little bit incognito, where, or at least I think I'm getting away with it. And this was the cover of the book. This is in India. This is in Pakistan. The Philippines. And this is the last image. This is in Beirut. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. That was marvelous. And I hope as all of you were looking at these photographs, that you were thinking about what we think about. Not only are these incredible aesthetic images, but they're also records of history. And you can see the amount of information, as reporters say, thick with information that these images have. So I want to ask him Ed the first question. We're going to have a few questions that we have some time. And just simply, Ed, I know you and Julie have been working on a project here, and I want to hear what you're doing right now.
Okay.
And then we'll have more questions.
Thanks. That was a setup question, by the way. Yeah. So one of the beautiful things of this moment for me, and I hope for Julie, is that after decades of being apart, we can now work together. And I'm really thankful that my life mate is someone I can actually create with. So with that in mind, so about 2.5 years ago, we started a new project which we're calling American Sketches. And we're actually focusing on Eagle Pass, Texas, and the Mississippi Delta. And we've done a little bit of work in Orlando, Florida. And we're just trying to do some very, very deep dive, like we're just repeatedly returning to the same characters in these places to just get a sense of like what is life like away from the headlines, away from certainly social media, but because I really do feel, and I don't know if Julie shares this with me as much, but we're not as divided as we're being led to believe. As someone who has the privilege to move around our country, it just breaks my heart to see what's going on, but also like this larger meta-narrative as though we somehow are on the cusp of civil war. And that's not what I see. I see most Americans getting along, working with each other, and all that. So that isn't to say there aren't incredibly terrible problems and very dark times we're living through. But anyway, that's what we're working on. So,
well, let's have some questions from the audience. I'm hoping, do we have the microphones out? Yeah, great. Okay, so have any questions here? Oh, here we go, over here.
It's for the recording, so yes, please wait for the mic. Thank you.
What advice do you have for working with subjects in terms of either when you're selecting for candid and or if you're posing your subjects?
So what was the beginning of your question?
What advice do you have?
So, I mean, other than portraits, I don't pose my subjects. You know, my whole approach is this sort of candid intimacy to sort of insert myself and kind of then, photograph in the candid way. But, I mean, I think the more important question is this idea of like how we cast our characters. I know that might sound weird for journalists or for documentarians, but, sometimes the hardest thing is to find and get access to the people that we need to get access to be able to tell the stories we're trying to tell. I don't know if that answers your question, and maybe you want to rephrase it, but
I think it does.
Okay.
Right over here. Yeah, in the wider. Yeah, there. Yeah, there we go. Just lift. Yeah, here comes the mic. Okay. Right behind you. There we go.
Hey there. So you've seen so much humanity and not all of it very pretty. What do you do? You're a family man. What do you do for yourself, for self-care, so that you can continue going in a sane fashion?
Yeah, I get that question every time. I mean, I think, first of all, I'm blessed that I have a family that we're still together and we actually genuinely love each other and like each other, so that and this is one of the beautiful things of these phones and this interconnectedness. For all the negative stuff that I can, like, just before I came here, I was on the phone with my daughter who was in Amsterdam, and like that. So this ability to be connected to people that I care about and love and I know feel the same towards me is hugely important. I mean, I've been in and out of therapy, definitely struggled with substances at times. I don't like alcohol or others. I'd probably be an alcoholic, but it's just it's a mixture of things: friends, therapy, having a mate that still listens to me. I think that's it. I don't know. When I see some of my colleagues who do much harder work than I've done and who aren't married or don't have kids, I don't know how they're made of something different, but it's very tough. And I think one of the beautiful developments in the last 10 years or so in this profession, in the media in general, not just in photography, is this idea of self-care and this notion that we do need to look out for ourselves. Because, and if I may, like, indulge this, in 2007, I worked on 2007, I think it was, no, 2008, I worked on the Arab Christian story. And I found myself in Damascus with an Iraqi family where like 10 of their relatives had been killed by Al-Qaeda. But 2 months earlier, Herbie had died, my father-in-law. And for the first time in my life, I was sitting there thinking, normally I'd be like in tears, and I was thinking, I can't wait to get back to my hotel room. And I thought, whoa, okay, this is not good. That my empathy, my empathy meter had dried up in a way. And it was a real wake-up call of this idea of that I do need to take care of myself, because you can't continue to absorb all this pain and trauma of others and then also deal with your own, and so anyway. So it's a really important issue. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that if I can't feel in that situation, then I need to stop doing this. Because these folks who have been through this trauma do not need another person with a camera in their face. That I have to be able to bring something to it that will not only tell their story with integrity, humanity, and dignity and all that, but also, just to be able to really. I think for too often there's kind of been a conceit in a way in the media where we can go from the rich world to wherever we want and say and ask and record whatever we want, and then that was okay. And that has also changed. Sorry, I'm going on here, but very important issue. Yeah.
Thank you so much for an amazing presentation tonight. And my question is, in our days, are you using filming camera? And if yes, what kind of Leica or not just digital cameras?
Yeah, I'm purely digital since 2002. Yeah. I had this epiphany, this moment. I was working in Somaliland in Africa on the Day in the Life of Africa project, and it was the first time they'd given us digital cameras. And I just had this moment where it's like, this must have been what it was like for, Cartier-Bresson and Lartigue in the 1930s in Paris when Kodak came out with roll film and Leica came out with a single lens reflex, and they could go around making multiple pictures, right? And so I thought, my God, not only can I do that, but I can broadcast it immediately all over the world. And I thought, why would I go through all the hassle of film, which at that point you were scanning anyway? So I hate to be so efficient, but it just seemed to me at that point that and then of course now if you have a really good camera and you have someone, not me, but someone who's great at Photoshop, you can make prints that look as beautiful as any silver gelatin print. I hope nobody's going to be upset with that. And this is the one irony, is the only other assignment I ever got after that where I had to shoot film was from Wired magazine.
Okay, way back there.
Thank you so much for presenting this tonight. What is the process like for getting truly embedded into these cultures that ordinarily wouldn't want, say, an American or an outsider presence coming into their world?
I mean, there's no one answer that fits all. It's all so circumstantial. It depends on, my God, it also depends where in the world you're talking about. Right, there's places in the world where it's much easier. People are much more accommodating, open, for whatever reasons. And then there's other parts of the world that are just, it feels impossible, virtually impossible to gain access, but I would say the key is to come prepared, to know. I wish I could see you, to know. Now this is like, I always feel like one of the best compliments, or when I know I'm on the right track, is when I'll be in conversation with someone and they'll go, wow, you know more than me about the political situation here, or like, I can't believe you know that thing about this, my culture. And I think, like, in any relationship, in any, just a conversation with someone you meet, anyway. So it's about doing your homework, doing your research as best as you can, also learning the cultural mores. I can't tell you how many times in the Muslim world I've gone to shake a woman's hand and I'm like, I'm left, and then there was one time in Dubai where a woman in a full chador hugged me. And then I started sort of like, you just don't know. That was a real tangent. Sorry. But I just love telling that story. But of course, I hoped her brother or father was not there when that happened. But so yeah, it's doing your homework really as best as you can, trying to understand. And then the other really important thing is, maybe you hear people talk about this, is to move with humility. That I'm not important, even in their eyes, what I'm doing might not be important. I think this is so important what I'm doing, and for a lot of people, it's like they don't care about National Geographic or Time Magazine, or they in some cases they never even heard of these things, And so, to really go through the world in a humble way, and also even down to the physical level, how you move. Right, like when you need to learn sometimes to make yourself small and quiet, and gentle and soft, and sometimes I need to puff out my chest and be strong. So it's all of these things. It's a lot of just like understanding humanity, understanding, reading the room, if you like. I hope that made sense for you.
Right here. Somebody, where's the mic? There we go. Thank you. He's on his way.
So in some of these situations that are more, I guess, dangerous or unpredictable, how have you navigated pursuing the opportunity for a story or a shot and maintaining your own safety and knowing when to call it quits and back off?
Yeah. Well, generally working with hopefully a really good, I hate the word fixer, but a producer, a local person that you can trust. And, that's really, it's the key. I mean, unless, you've moved to Ukraine, let's say in this case, right? You can't go to Gaza, but you moved to Ukraine and you've been there for 6 months or a year, so you really understand the lay of the land. But otherwise, it's really being able to hire with and work with really good people who, so that when they say, we've got to get out of here, or no, I'm not going into that neighborhood, you listen to them, as well as doing your own research and homework.
Right over here. Right over here. You guys are getting your exercise tonight.
This is sort of similar to the mental health question, but I'm just curious if you've ever had periods of serious burnout, or if you've been in a creative rut. What are some things that helped you recover from that?
Yeah. So, I don't know. It's weird. I look back now and I can't believe I didn't experience burnout, but I think some of it is just that I was so driven. And there were times where I would feel burnt out, and then I might make a picture, or I might have an experience, and it was like just a shot of B12, like I was back in the game, I think Julie might answer that differently, that I was a complete manic depressive, and so I think sometimes we can't see ourselves clearly. A lot of times we can't see ourselves clearly, but I think I just was so determined, and I don't know if ambitious is the right word, but just determined, and I dedicated myself to this, and sometimes I think that's what it takes to, especially in this kind of a profession, Especially now, it's so difficult, so much harder than when I was starting. But yeah, I would say that I skirted burnout constantly. Yeah.
Well, I want to invite everyone to come over to the Briscoe Center and get something to eat and drink, and also you can have time to visit with Ed, and we have folks who will show you out how to get to the center up here. So thank you all for coming. Great. Good stuff. Good stuff.